Hello. Today on Robert's Full English Breakfast Show, we have a gentleman who is in charge of the world's most famous merchant ship. Yet, in 1869, when she was launched, she only had a life expectancy of some 30 years. I'm very pleased to introduce the chairman of the Cutty Sark Trust, Richard Doughty. Richard, thank you very much indeed for coming to my little show here today. She's had this sort of amazing checkered sort of highs and lows throughout her life. I mean, when she was built in Dumbarton, wasn't it? The company that built her, it then went bankrupt, and it had to be actually finished by another firm. Was it Linton?
Well, Linton's, yes, and it's quite extraordinary taking the ship apart as we've been doing over the last 5 or 6 years. There's really, I think of it as a tide line. You can almost see the change in the resource that was available to finish off the ship. To begin with, everything is first class. I mean, this is a ship that looks like a Victorian yacht, really, but clearly they were counting the pennies when they finished her. And I found it intriguing when we took the Master's saloon apart. It was very obvious to us that it's actually come from another vessel. It clearly was not
the
built.
Original.
Well, it wasn't built for the ship. They've run out of money. They're being cost effective. And I think they've taken the material that they actually fitted out the Master's saloon with from an earlier vessel.
How long did she do the sort of tea run?
Well, I mean, it's perverse, isn't it? We think of Cutty Sark as a tea clipper. She was undoubtedly built for the China tea trade, but she only really had 7 trips going and getting tea, and then it was really a question of finding an alternative use for her.
And what was that?
Well, initially, she was just sort of trading generally in the South China Seas, but the inspiration was when they thought of using her as a wool clipper. And it's really during that period that she became, well, yes, she became a legend in her working life. People used to flock to the docks, both in London and in Sydney, to see this famous ship.
Was it in about 1895 that she finished and got sold, or am I wrong there?
No, I mean, broadly, as you said in your introduction, the aspiration was that she would have 25, 30 years working life. And as soon as she hit that, Jock Willis was a man of business, no sentiments. Off she goes, we'll sell her and invest somewhere else. So yes, she was sold to the Vieira company in Portugal. And she had a new lease of life. And what the Portuguese did was to change the rig to a barkentine rig, and that enabled her to be able to manoeuvre much more.
Change direction.
Change tack. And of course that meant that the ship was able to go to a lot more different ports. So we actually end up with a vessel which you happily described as the most famous merchant ship in the world. I happen to think it's the most famous ship in the world. It was able to go to virtually every major national port around the world. That's quite an achievement. Out in China, Australia, Africa, South North America. This is a ship that's been everywhere, seen everything.
Did they actually change the name of the Cutty Sark?
Well, they did. They called it the Little Shirt, La Fiera. So yes, that was her name change, but it was very much a nod to her original name.
What happened to her then?
She was spotted by a chap called Captain Dowman, and she was in a very grubby state. Very few people would have recognised her as the Cutty Sark. He did. He recognised her because as a young cadet he'd been on board another vessel and Cutty Sark had gone straight past.
So it's a sort of dream that you never forget. I'm going to get a Ferrari one day, or
absolutely.
Or
the Ferrari, I think, is a nice analogy, or Concorde. I mean, this, as we know, is a ship built for speed, and it always inspired him. He always had a very special place in his heart for her. It took a little over a year and actually required him to go over to Portugal to get her, and he brought her back
to Falmouth.
I always think of him as the first saviour. And he he didn't mortgage himself to the hilt, but he certainly sold off a considerable part of the asset that he and his wife owned to be able to restore her to her 1872 condition.
I am very pleased to say that we found some never before seen footage of the Cutty Sark.
You did, and I'm very grateful.
in the Carrick Road, which was filmed in the 1930s. So I asked the lady that actually produced this footage, and she said she would be really thrilled if we give a little taster, because it's going to be part of the exhibition when the Cutty Sark reopens. Well, here we see the images of the Cutty Sark in the Carrick Roads, which is the bit of water between Falmouth and St Mawes in Cornwall. And it's, as you can see, just a very, very quick shot, clearly of the Cutty Sark. But there are one or two submarine there, so you can actually date it quite accurately to a period in the 1930s.
Well, I mean, you really have saved an important part of the ship's history, and I called him Captain Dowman a saviour. I mean, in that sense, to put it in context, he purchased that ship for the nation. That was his motivation. He purchased it for the nation. That's a headline that appeared in the Times. But it predates the presentation of Victory in Portsmouth to the wider public. It predates the USS Constitution in Boston. It's the first historic ship that has been preserved and got open for the public to see, even if they had to row out to look at it. They did, and a little cottage industry developed, taking visitors out to the Cutty Sark. Right there, as shown in that film. Yeah.
I was yesterday down in Cornwall, and I've got some shots here which I'll tell you are of Trevisen House, where Captain Dowman lived.
Indeed.
And he had to sell off most of his farm, and it's quite a big estate. And actually, when you see the house now and what was left, Cutty Sark had quite a bite of the cherry to keep her up to scratch.
Well, I'm afraid it did, but for his intervention,
we wouldn't have it.
We almost
today.
certainly wouldn't have it today.
When he died, I believe, in his widow offered it to Cornwall, to Falmouth, and they turned it down. Naughty Falmouth. But anyway, Falmouth's loss is very much Greenwich's gain. And but first of all, it came up to the Greenhithe. And what happened to it there, sort of?
Well, it had a history as a sail training ship, and it was being used alongside HMS Worcester, also down in Falmouth as a sail training ship, and it came up to the Thames for that express purpose, and it carried on really in that vein right up until the Festival of Britain, when the Duke of Edinburgh, who I think of as the second saviour, and arguably the third too, because he's a big part of the project that we're involved with. It was his intervention which really got the Cutty Sark to Greenwich, in association with Frank Carr, who was the director of the National Maritime Museum at that time. Dare we say May 2007, something pretty dreadful happened. I don't think we need sort of egg the pudding, but I live just some 100 yards or so from the Cutty Sark, and it woke me up, the smell, and it was one of the most beautiful perfume smells I've ever smelt, really, because I suppose it's 200-year-old wood covered in tar that's been around the world I don't know how many times, and it was a very beautiful smell, but not a very beautiful outcome. That must have been one of the lowest points of your association with the ship. Well, that undoubtedly was the low point. I mean, there have been a number of low points. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride when you take on a project that's so ambitious. But yes, that smell, when I ran down Deptford Creek unsighted before I saw the ship, I thought we'd lost it. It was a smell that you normally only experience down in the hold. And suddenly It was pervading the whole of Greenwich, wasn't it? And yes, my heart was in my mouth
Yes.
when I turned the corner. I was expecting the ship to have been lost. The fire brigade had already told me on the phone she was alight from stem to stern. But I could see there was hope, and hope has been realised, and Cutty Sark is back. And the important thing is, this ship is not a replica. This is the same
real
ship
thing.
that sailed to the South China Seas. We've been able to save her, to conserve her. The planks that have gone back onto the hull are the original planks. The frames are the original frames. We've had to put in a whole lot of additional steel work. But when you go on board, and if you've been, don't think you've done it, because you've got to come back and see what we've done. Anything painted white is original fabric. Anything painted grey is new steel, and you'll struggle to see the new steel.
John. Well, here on Robert's Full English Breakfast Show, we always give our guests a cake, and I thought, in homage to the Cutty Sark, we'll have some tea cakes. Richard Doughty, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you.